7 bikers, 1 diner, 1 quiet man. They thought he was an easy target. They were wrong. This is the story of Jake Bear Thornton and the day a small-town diner became a battleground for justice. 7 notorious bikers stormed into Dusty's diner one late afternoon, thinking they'd found an easy mark. A quiet man sat alone in a corner booth, seemingly minding his own business. The leader, a burly man known as Cobra, grinned at his crew as they sauntered in, their heavy boots clunking against the linoleum floor. The faint jingle of chains added to their menacing presence. Cobra adjusted his leather vest, adorned with patches declaring allegiance to a gang notorious for its lawless reputation. He scanned the room. A young waitress, nervously carrying a tray, a mother with 2 small children in a booth near the back, and the lone man in the corner, a mountain of a figure who seemed entirely unfazed by their arrival. Cobra's grin widened. Trouble was his calling card, and this small-town diner looked like the perfect place to flex his muscle. The man in the corner sipped his coffee. At 6'7" and 280 pounds, Jake Bear Thornton was impossible to ignore, though he seemed to prefer blending into the background. His thick beard, flecked with silver, matched the streaks in his cropped hair. A weathered jacket stretched across his frame, and his calloused hands dwarfed the coffee cup he held. At 52, Jake had an air of quiet authority, the kind that didn't come from bluster or bravado, but from years of facing things most people couldn't imagine, and coming out the other side alive. He'd served 20 years as a Force Recon Marine, leading missions in places no one wanted to think about. After retiring, he'd spent another 5 years trying to find peace, drifting from town to town, volunteering at veteran shelters, and helping those who needed a steady hand. He didn't seek trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. Cobra strolled toward the counter, his heavy boots echoing. "Friendly little place you got here," he said to the waitress, his voice dripping with mockery. He leaned over the counter, his chain-draped vest clinking. "Why don't you pour me a cup of coffee, sweetheart?" The waitress froze, her hands trembling as she reached for the pot. One of the bikers deliberately knocked over a napkin holder, the clattering sound making her jump. Another, a wiry man with a knife tattoo curling up his neck, smirked as he slid into a booth and propped his feet on the table. Jake watched the scene unfold, his sharp grey eyes scanning the room. 7 of them, each trying to outdo the others in intimidation. Cobra was the leader. His swagger and loud voice gave him away. The wiry one with the tattoo was dangerous, his hand constantly fidgeting near his pocket. Another was stocky with fists like sledgehammers. The others spread out, their movements practiced, as if they'd done this sort of thing many times before. Cobra's attention shifted to the mother and her 2 children in the back booth. The younger child whimpered, and the mother instinctively pulled him closer. Cobra's grin widened. "What's wrong, kid?" he called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Your mama too good to say hello?" The waitress nearly dropped the coffee pot, her face pale. Jake set his cup down, his movements deliberate, and stood up. The room seemed to shrink as he unfolded his massive frame. All eyes turned to him. "Leave them alone," Jake said, his voice low and steady, but it carried the weight of authority. He stepped forward, his boots barely making a sound. Cobra turned slowly, his grin fading as he sized up the man who had dared to speak. "Well, well," Cobra drawled. "Looks like we got ourselves a hero. Big guy like you must think you can take on the whole lot of us." Jake didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, his calm gaze meeting Cobra's. "I don't think anything," he said, his tone measured. "I know." The wiry man with the knife tattoo snorted, pulling out a switchblade and flicking it open. "I think he's bluffing," he said, taking a step toward Jake. Jake's expression didn't change. "Put it away, son," he said, his voice steady. "You don't want to do this." The biker lunged, but Jake moved faster than anyone expected. His massive hand caught the man's wrist, twisting it sharply and sending the knife clattering to the floor. In one fluid motion, Jake swept the man's legs out from under him and shoved him into a booth, the impact rattling the dishes. Another biker charged, his fists swinging in wide arcs. Jake sidestepped the first punch and caught the second, using the man's momentum to flip him over his shoulder. The stocky biker hit the ground hard, groaning as he clutched his side. Cobra reached for the revolver tucked under his vest, but Jake was already moving. He closed the distance in 2 strides, grabbing Cobra's arm and twisting it until the gun fell from his grasp. Cobra swung with his free hand, but Jake ducked under the blow and drove his shoulder into Cobra's chest, sending him crashing into a table. The remaining bikers hesitated, their bravado faltering. Jake straightened his imposing frame, his calm demeanor more intimidating than any weapon. "You've got 2 choices," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "Walk out of here now, or find out how much worse this can get." Cobra groaned as he struggled to his feet, his eyes darting between Jake and his crew. "Let's go," he muttered, his voice laced with humiliation. The bikers shuffled toward the door, dragging their injured comrades with them. Cobra paused in the doorway, glaring back at Jake. "This ain't over," he growled. Jake's expression didn't waver. "Yes, it is." The door swung shut behind them and the diner erupted into applause. Jake ignored it, returning to his booth and picking up his coffee. The waitress approached hesitantly, her hands trembling as she refilled his cup. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't been here." Jake nodded. "No one should have to put up with that," he said. "Are you okay?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yeah, I think so." Frank, the diner's owner, came out from behind the counter, his face a mix of awe and gratitude. "You ever need a meal? It's on the house," he said, shaking Jake's hand. Jake smiled faintly. "Appreciate it, Frank, but I wasn't looking for a free meal." The next morning, Jake woke to find his phone buzzing with notifications. A video of the encounter had gone viral overnight, shared by one of the diners who had recorded the entire thing. Headlines described him as a hero, a protector, a force of nature. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. He hadn't wanted attention. He'd spent the last 5 years living quietly, working odd jobs and helping out at local veteran shelters. But it seemed his quiet life was about to get a lot more complicated. By noon, reporters were camped outside the diner, eager to interview the giant Marine. Jake avoided them, heading instead to the veteran shelter where he volunteered. Clara, the shelter's director, met him at the door, holding up her phone. "You've become quite the celebrity," she said. "Not by choice," Jake replied. "How's everything here?" Clara smiled. "Better, actually. Donations have been pouring in all morning. People saw the video and want to help. We're even getting calls from veterans who want to get involved." Jake's brow furrowed. "That's good, but we need to make sure this attention goes to the right places." As the days passed, the video continued to gain traction, sparking a national conversation about veterans and their role in the community. Jake found himself fielding calls from organizations, politicians, and even former bikers who wanted to turn their lives around. One day, Cobra himself showed up at the shelter, his head hung low. "I didn't come here to fight," Cobra said, his voice rough. I don't want to be that guy anymore. What you did, standing up like that, it made me realize I've been on the wrong path for a long time." Jake studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "If you're serious about changing, we'll help you." Cobra nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I am. I don't know how, but I want to try." Word spread, and soon Jake was working with Clara to set up programs for troubled bikers and veterans alike, teaching them skills and helping them find purpose. What started as a small initiative grew into a movement, with chapters popping up in towns and cities across the country. Jake's philosophy was simple. Strength isn't about power over others, it's about lifting them up. Months later, As Jake stood in the middle of a refurbished garage filled with veterans and reformed bikers working side by side, he couldn't help but smile. The walls were lined with photos of families restored, motorcycles, and handwritten notes of thanks. This was what he had been fighting for, not glory or recognition. Thank you so much for watching and supporting Story Karma. Your engagement, whether it's watching, liking, commenting, or sharing, helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of crime, justice, and karma. We truly appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this journey. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support keeps this channel going, and we can't wait to share more incredible stories with you.